Welcome to Disciple Dojo, guys. This may be 2 episodes. I'm going to see how it goes in editing. So I just spent the afternoon talking to Dr. Andrew King. In addition to being an Old Testament scholar, Andrew's also a jiu-jitsu guy. And I've been wanting to have him on. I've been wanting to meet him for a while. I actually got my friend Richard Middleton to introduce me to him at SBL because I saw a picture he posted that he had been training with John Danaher, who I had done many a class with up at Henzo's back in the Blue Basement days. And I was like, whoa, you train. And you just trained with somebody who I've trained with before, and we need to know each other. This episode, we start with jiu-jitsu. We nerd out about that for a little bit. And then we move into his specialty, which is the book of Hosea. Mainly, Andrew's done most of his work in the prophets, the minor prophets in particular. He teaches Old Testament. He is in the process of putting out a commentary on the book of Hosea. And that's a book that I know people have questions about. You know, one of the longest of the minor prophets. And Hosea is a fascinating book. It's quoted a lot in the New Testament, but sometimes it's unclear what the New Testament authors are actually doing with it. So I was like, come on, let's nerd out about jiu-jitsu. Let's nerd out about Hosea and let the viewers tune in if either of those things interest them. And I know for some of you out there, both of those things will interest you. So if that's you, man, this episode is just right up your alley. But I am really excited, so we're not going to waste any time. If you appreciate this discussion, we would love for you to show it by subscribing to the channel, sharing, liking, commenting, all that kind of stuff. Let's just go ahead and get right into it. We structured this episode around the concept of jiu-jitsu, so I'm actually going to ask Andrew questions about the book of Hosea at different levels, different belt levels. So we're going to have some white belt questions, people that have never read the book, all the way up to black belt questions, like Bible nerdy scholar questions. So there's something for everybody in this episode. Let's get right into it. Disciple Dojo viewers, I want you to join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew King. Andrew is a fellow jiu-jitsu nerd. And let's be honest, that's the real reason I'm having him on. His scholarship and his biblical study stuff is awesome. We're going to get into that, but I've been actually wanting to meet him. I had Richard Middleton be my wingman to introduce me at SBL last year because he's a fellow jiu-jitsu guy. So Andrew, man, I've wanted to have you on for a while. Welcome to the dojo.
Thanks so much. This is very much a bucket list item. So I feel like after this comes out, I've kind of peaked. So I plan on retiring. When I get to my gym, I expect them to hand me my black belt, and there you go. I've kind of arrived.
You'll have earned it for sure. Yes. Yeah. You tell me. So we were just before I started recording, we were actually already talking about jiu-jitsu stuff. And for viewers who don't know, Andrew and I both are into combat sports, mixed martial arts, and particularly Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So I would love for you, because people on this channel hear me talk all the time, I'd love for you to tell viewers what's jiu-jitsu and what's Brazilian jiu-jitsu and what's different about that than Japanese jiu-jitsu, or why do when you say I do jiu-jitsu and people go hiya and they do karate hands, why is that something you should never do? So give us a little background how you discovered the gentle art.
Yeah, well, jiu-jitsu is basically karate. So anybody who tells you, it's basically karate, they're probably just kidding. If you're watching this and you get nothing else, you don't care about Hosea, just do not associate Brazilian jiu-jitsu with taekwondo, karate, these other things. Yeah. Capoeira, I get that sometimes. Is that like, flippity martial arts? Yeah. So I grew up not being very active. So I wasn't a Christian for a while, and I went off to college as a non-Christian, not really interested in the things of God, really just trying to get away from my parents, my wonderful godly parents, and so I moved out of state to try to get away from them, to have a good time and get as lost as I could be. So I ended up in Mississippi, in Starkville, Mississippi, at Mississippi State, and I joined up with a fraternity. And I remember walking into a frat brother's room. This was in the summer of 2004. I had just gotten there, just joined up. So this is kind of like before the semester. And I walked into a fraternity brother's room, and UFC 48 was on. And he had gotten UFC 48, and the main event was Ken Shamrock versus Chemo. And I had never seen anything like this before in my life. I didn't know the UFC existed. I had done some type of martial art when I was like a little kid, but it was, very performative. But I saw these guys get in there and they're going at it. And I just remember the end of the fight. Ken Shamrock is kind of up against the cage, and he backs off Chemo. He gets double underhooks, and then he knees him in the face and knocks him out. And I was just stunned. And I said, I want to knee people in the face. That's amazing. I want to get kneed in the face. That's amazing. And so from that point forward, my life changed. So this is 2004. And I saw that, and I just started looking around for MMA gyms, and back then it was hard to find a spot. So there was no place in town. There was a Japanese jiu-jitsu place. I tried out once, and it was very clear it was not what I was looking for. They didn't do any live sparring, except for the one time I said, "Hey, I'm interested in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu," and they incorporated some live sparring. I actually got in trouble for doing a cross collar choke on somebody, so that was kind of weird. But from there, I basically just kind of got some material. I got some Eddie Bravo. I got the Eddie Bravo rubber guard book. I was just reading that every day. I got Renzo Gracie's and the Danaher book, and I was reading that every day, just trying to figure it out. And then I found a blue belt who was there, who taught me some stuff. And it really wasn't until we were in there grappling in the student center one time, and this little guy comes in. He's from Belarus, and he walks in. He's wearing jeans and a t-shirt. This guy weighs 115. He's tiny. And he says, "Oh, what are you doing?" And we're like, "Oh, this is jiu-jitsu, And he's like, "Oh, I train a little bit." And he's like, "Can I roll?" And I'm like, "Dude, this is kind of disrespectful, just busting up on our training like this." He tapped me out in record time. And he was some high-level purple belt, cleaned up absolute divisions. And so he was kind of my training partner for the rest of my college career. We trained together. And so I trained for about 5 years at that time, entered some grappling tournaments and did all these things. My first grappling tournament, this would have been, I was, brand new white belt, just watching a lot of stuff. But I remember in April of 2004, Pride Total Elimination. Minotauro Nogueira, who was he? Hirotako Yokoi. And this long fight, they're duking it out, and he locks in an anaconda choke and, chokes this guy out. And I saw that and I was like, I love that. That's my move now. And I had a grappling tournament right after that. I had 5 matches that day, and I won 4 of them with an anaconda choke. I saw Minotauro throw it down, so I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah. That's so funny how you gravitate towards certain moves and you can't explain why. You're just you can watch them. Sometimes I'll see a move how somebody does it, and I'm like, oh, okay, and I have a grappling dummy in the other room, so I'll go in and workshop it and kind of get it. And sometimes I'll see somebody it'll be a reel on Instagram or something, and they'll demonstrate it once, and I'm like, that makes complete sense in my head, and I know that move now. It just clicks.
Yeah.
Can't explain it. Yeah. I don't know why. So did you do, because back in the early days of especially MMA, everybody had to do ad hoc training. They had to piece together, like you were saying, DVDs and not even DVDs maybe, but VHS tapes and books. and it was just like kind of when I started, getting my blue belt was this unattainable goal in my head because it was just such a different level from where I was. A purple belt was a unicorn. And how long did you do that? Or did you did you start coming up under somebody immediately? Or did you kind of bounce around for like in college, sometimes you just train with whoever. Is that what you did?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a lot of it. Over the summers, I would go home and I would train. I grew up in Florida. So I would go and I would train at a Gracie school down there. One of Hoist Gracie's black belts. I was down there, Charles Dos Anjos. He was a great teacher, really enjoyed learning from him. But most of my stuff was kind of no-gi. Yeah. And I was just watching Marcelo Garcia and just saying, I want to do that too, So it was kind of piecing together, trying to find other people who were interested. So yeah, there was no gym that was kind of where I was. And in fact, there was a guy, he owned a karate studio. And I went and checked it out because he advertised that they're starting doing some type of grappling. And I went in there and I was like, I've been training a couple of years and kind of cleaned up in there. And he said, all right, hey, I'll let you train here for free if you help me train my guys. And I'm like, I don't know how to train people, But yeah, I was kind of cobbling it together. And so I did mostly no-gi, although I was probably maybe like 2 or 3 years into kind of doing that, where there was like a traveling, seminar that was kind of coming through. I attended, and the guy gave me 2 stripes on my white belt, and I was like, "What's your name again?" I didn't know this guy, right? And so the 5 years that I trained, I wasn't really belted up at all, and didn't really, wasn't training up under anybody. It was very ad hoc. I was very influenced by a lot of 10th Planet stuff, and so kind of absorbed all of that. So I trained for about 5 years, and I became a believer my junior year of college. That kind of changed my trajectory. And I was actually driving. I had one MMA fight, and I was driving to this MMA fight, and the Lord got a hold of me just over the course of this drive, and then after that, I wanted to pursue just further studies, and pastor pointed me towards seminary. So relocated to do seminary, started my studies there. And the greatest mistake of my life is that I stopped training. I stopped training. I justified it by I'm busy, it's expensive. There's not a gym super close to me, so I'd have to drive, all this stuff. And so I stopped training, and I stopped training for about a decade. And my body did not like that. So, my body is revolting against me now. So I've been back training for about 2 years now at the gym I'm currently at. It's Zach Cummings' gym. It's called Ignite Jiu-Jitsu and MMA in Kansas City. And I train under one of his black belts there, and blue belt, 3-strapped blue belt, and
yeah, man.
Yeah, I love it. It's the bug has got me again, so I'm in there 4 or 5 days a week. We train at 5 a.m. We do about an hour of technical drilling, and then the 6 a.m. class starts. So I get in there with some guys early. We watch some BJJ Fanatics videos and kind of do that stuff. But
You're
it's
the early
a blast,
morning
man.
crew. I'm the opposite. So we have an early morning class, and I have not stepped foot in it once. I close the academy. Like I'll be at the last class of the night, and then the last thing I want to do before at the end of the day is like I want training to be how I end my day. But so many people, like when we go up to Henzo's and train, John's class was the 7 a.m. class. And so I would have to make myself get there at 7 a.m. to train with, the DDS. And it's the only time I would ever do morning classes ever.
Yeah.
But it's worth it, when you can train with high level guys and you just make your schedule, you just make your body work however it can for that amount of time.
Yeah.
But
I'm totally, for me, it's just, so I'm not a very healthy eater. All right. So
As I drink my Pepsi Zero, go ahead. Go ahead. Gracie Diet.
so I think I've heard Gary Tonin say, he's apparently a very, very much a bad eater. And I remember him saying one time, if I lose a match because of something I ate the day before, then my jiu-jitsu wasn't good enough.
Yeah.
And I thought, hey, okay. Thanks, Gary Tonin.
Yeah. Be
I'll
like Gary.
That. And
of course, he was in his 20s when he said that, so you got to factor that in as well.
I know. I haven't gotten updated on his dietary situation these days, but yeah. So for me, it's if I don't get it done in the morning, I've done things, I've eaten, and I've been to a couple of night classes, but I just feel off when I go to a night class.
Yeah,
and so. Yeah. Morning is just like get up and get in there. And I feel like I won the day. I survived rounds against, the professor and, okay. Like can't get much worse.
You have kids?
Yeah. So we've got 4.
Say no more. Like when you have kids, you have to get stuff done early or else it won't get done. And that makes sense. I have a blind Shih Tzu wandering around over there. That's all I live with. So my nights are either I'm going to be real bored if I'm not at jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
I know that that's not the case for you guys that are parents.
Yeah.
Well,
but
so what you said,
you
said something that is interesting. You said on your way you had one MMA fight. Is that?
Yeah.
Was it amateur or pro or unsanctioned or? Okay.
Yeah, as an amateur bout. Yeah.
So on your way to the fight, you said God got a hold of you. Is because were you meditating on your impending death, and that's what got you? Was it the fear of like, I might meet this God soon?
It was not, although that probably should have been. It was, the fear of God should have been in me. No, I was driving, and again, I had moved to Mississippi to get away from religion, all this stuff. I was running from God. And as I was driving to this fight, it may have been a grappling match. I'm trying to remember. I had some type of combat event. Can't remember if it was my MMA fight or a grappling event. But I was driving by myself, and for the first time and as long as I could remember, I just started thinking about my life.
Yeah.
And, all of these things I was investing all this energy and effort into pleasing people and trying to get friends and all of these things that the world promises you, and it wasn't delivering. I didn't feel better. I didn't feel fulfilled. Friends were letting me down. I was driving alone because people didn't want to come and watch me, compete. So I'm just driving, just like, man, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And it moved from thinking, man, my life isn't going anywhere, to remembering the gospel that my parents shared with me.
Oh, wow.
That it wasn't just about how I felt, but actually that I was alienated from God, who I was made to be in fellowship with.
Yeah.
And it was simply remembering the gospel that my parents had shared with me growing up, that I'd resisted so vehemently. It was remembering the gospel where God brought me to himself just on this car ride. And so just on the way there, I just cried out, Jesus, help. I don't know what this is supposed to look like, but, here I am. And, just came back a believer. And I popped into a little Baptist church, and the pastor there was just so kind. He taught me what it looked like to love Jesus and love the people of Jesus, to love the world that Jesus created, to wash the feet of the saints, to serve and to do all these things. He discipled me. And, for that, I'm forever grateful.
Man, that's awesome. And that was in Mississippi when you were in college?
Yeah. Yeah.
You went to Mississippi State?
I did. Yeah.
All right. So another SEC. I like keeping it in the SEC. That's nice.
Yeah.
Where did you grew up in Florida? Which part of Florida?
Tampa Bay area. So an hour south of Tampa, a town called Bradenton.
There's good jiu-jitsu down there.
I know there is now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like there wasn't at the time. I know, that's how here in Charlotte, when I started, there were maybe 3 black belts that I knew of in North Carolina. And now there's, I don't know, like 20 just here in Charlotte. The sport has just exploded. And what surprises me, and I think it surprises a lot of people, once we start talking about what jiu-jitsu is, and that one, people weren't, okay, you're a YouTube Bible teacher, but you're also a jiu-jitsu instructor and you know, like, and an artist on the side. And they're curious about it. And I tell them, like, yeah, the sport is the sport, the art, the whatever you want to call it. I know there's a debate about that, but the jiu-jitsu just has exploded in part because of what the UFC did. You know, UFC originally was just one giant Horian Gracie marketing tool to get jiu-jitsu, and it worked. It worked brilliantly. And people like yourself, I mean, I grew up doing traditional karate and taekwondo. So I watched, for me, I was under a lineage in a style of karate under a guy who was under Ron Van Cleef. And Ron Van Cleef fought in UFC 3. He was the oldest competitor. He's like in his 50s. He fought Royce Gracie. He was the Black Dragon was his nickname. And so I watched that as a karate guy being like, oh, Ron Van Cleef, he's going to destroy this guy. Yeah. And of course, Royce tapped him out and, you know, didn't even throw a punch. And it was just it was one of those, like, a lot of people in the traditional martial arts community, and I was one of them at first, made a lot of excuses. Like, well, if I was there, I would have done this. Or, oh, what you have to do to stop the shot is you have to hit them before they get in and all this stuff. And it just became like this. It basically put your finger in your ears and say, la, 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 I'm not listening. But a number of the jiu-jitsu people, a number of the traditional martial arts people were like, hey, we need to know this stuff because without it, I know nothing. And one of the, if there's famous video, Chuck Norris was one of the early guys that brought in Henzo and Horian and Royce and all of them and had the big seminar in the 90s. Yeah. And that was when we had just mentioned before we went live, or before we started recording, Silver Fox, friend of mine, he was a Taekwondo guy too. And he started training and with Henzo in New York after, seeing this and was just like, I have to know this. So a lot of the people that were like true martial artists, when they saw jiu-jitsu, and more importantly, when they felt jiu-jitsu, is when they were like, I have to learn this. And some of us were hard-headed, and I was among them. Let me tell you, you said your biggest regret was quitting jiu-jitsu. I'll give you my biggest regret. I'm only a couple of years older than you. I was in college at Georgia in 1997, and I used to go work out at the student center. And I took Taekwondo in Athens, like Athens Taekwondo. And it was a great academy, a great Taekwondo academy. And one of the guys that his brother owns it, my friend Curtis, his brother is in the UFC now, Chris Barnett. It was great. I loved that time, but I would go to the student center to work out and I would pass the wrestling room upstairs. So they had like the wrestling room, the yoga room, and then a room with heavy bags. So I was Taekwondo and I just wanted to go kick heavy bags after my workout. So I had to pass the wrestling room and I would pass these sweaty guys like rolling around with each other. I'm like, man, what a waste. Who wants to do that? They're not kicking anybody. They're not punching. I'm going to go. And I would just do like these fancy kicking drills on the bag for like an hour. And it was, I thought I knew something, but fast forward. So I'd see the same guys in that room. Fast forward 2005, I'm finishing up seminary, watching The Ultimate Fighter on TV, the first season on Spike. And I see this guy on it and I'm like, he looks so familiar. And I realized I finally put two and two together. The guy who I would pass by was Forrest Griffin and Rory Singer and Adam Singer and all the guys at Hardcore in Athens. And I would just pass by them and go kick my heavy bag. And now he won the first Ultimate. So I could have started jiu-jitsu like 10 years earlier. Yeah. That's my equivalent of what you said. If I could go back and do something over again, is such a wasted opportunity. But you didn't know.
I'm always reminded, the Lord has us exactly where we need to be, and so, I mean, who knows if I would have stuck with it, I'd maybe somewhere else, the Lord may have taken, so I'm exactly where I need to be. My bones hurt more, getting smashed by some of these younger people is humbling. So man, I need that.
Man, it is so humbling.
Got my kids in it. It's amazing. My son has he's competing in his first tournament in a couple of weeks.
Awesome.
He's 10.
Oh,
so
that's
I'm
great.
really excited to see him compete. And just trying to be a positive presence in the gym, just all these things.
It's so cool when I have students who I teach adults on Wednesday and then I teach kids on Thursday. And I have a lot of students in my adult class who started training through their kids. And then some who train with their kids, and now their kids are old enough to be in that class and are their training partners. And it's really cool seeing the family, like a family activity that you get to get your aggression out against mom or dad, or, like there's a little bit of that, your brothers, your sisters, but it's a healthy way, and it's something you're doing together. And you're not just getting family time, but you're also learning a skill. That's the thing. Like, you don't have to worry about like your kid getting bullied physically is probably not at the top of your list of worries. Like if they're training, you're giving them something that's gonna. I try to explain this to parents. You're investing in it's like giving your kids swimming lessons. You don't have to worry if they ever get too close to water and fall in, they're going to drown, because they know how to swim. And I wish more people would understand that about jiu-jitsu, especially with kids. But
if you're watching this, anybody who's watching this, if you're a parent, get your kids into jiu-jitsu. Many people have said time and time again, it is a superpower. It is an absolute superpower. Yep. It gives you a level of confidence. I mean, it is the most practical thing you can do for your child. Teach them the gospel, teach them the Bible, get them plugged into the church, all of that stuff. Be a really good parent and put them in jiu-jitsu.
Absolutely.
It's life-changing. I mean, really, I look at some of these kids in my kids' class and I'm like, man, this kid is 10 years old, training, around all of this talent. And, it's just amazing. This kid is going to grow up with a level of self-confidence and, just self-possession that, I didn't have as a kid. If an altercation ever arose, I cowered because I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
But when you know that you can handle yourself, it's pretty remarkable. Yeah. And, that's really what attracted me to jiu-jitsu early on. When I was watching actual jiu-jitsu, I'd watch, Marcelo Garcia, and I remember in 2005 when he fought Rico Rodriguez, ADCC. And, this little guy is climbing on the back of this big guy, and able to take him down. And, in jiu-jitsu, the smaller guy isn't necessarily at a disadvantage if they know what they're doing.
Yep.
And so I love that.
Yeah.
So parents, put your kids in jiu-jitsu.
I could not agree more. Jesus and jiu-jitsu have changed more lives than anything I know of on earth, in that order.
Yeah.
And
right.
now some people struggle. And so tell me for viewers because I have some viewers that have been like, I don't know if Christians can do martial arts. I don't know if, isn't that learning violence? And I talked to him about, jiu-jitsu means the gentle art, and there's a reason you don't have to use violence. Like Royce won the first 2 of his first UFCs. I don't know if he threw a punch, or threw a few punches at most, but it was all taking people down, controlling. But because you started training before you were a believer. And I've been a believer all my life, raised as a preacher's kid, got baptized when I was 6, knew the gospel. I don't have a prodigal story in that regard, but I've always done martial arts. I saw Karate Kid in the theater and I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah.
I watched the ABC show Sidekicks. That's an old school one, folks. Remember Sidekicks? Ernie Reyes Jr. was the little kid. Gil Gerard was his cop partner, and they would go around. He'd fight gangs. I just posted a clip of that on my Instagram because it was such a terrible, awesomely 80s terrible show. But I was like, I want to learn karate because that's the era I came up in. But I was also a believer. Some people have really struggled. And to this day, they're like, I don't know what to do with Jesus's call to love your enemies, turn the other cheek, all that kind of stuff. And training martial art, you're training how to hurt people. That's what they say. So how do you reconcile that? And how did anything change about your training when you became a Christian, or did you just kind of get a little more focused? What was that about?
No, nothing really changed about my training other than I cleaned up my life because I knew that's what Jesus wanted me to do, you know? So, so it's an ethical issue for some people. It's a moral issue that, everybody has to think through. But the reality is that we live in a dangerous world. Genesis 3 world, you have violence that is around every corner, and I want to equip my kids. Just speaking as a parent here, I want to equip my kids for every dangerous thing out there, right? Whether spiritual or physical in nature, right? I want to equip my kids with the sword of the Spirit. So, when Satan's coming at them, they've got a sword and they've got a shield. And they can extinguish those darts and they can go on the offense with the Word of God. And so I want to equip them with that. But also I want them to be physically safe. I heard somebody say recently, it's a blessing to be the most dangerous person in the room, but the most dangerous person in the room doesn't feel threatening to those that they love. Right. So I invest hours and hours each week to becoming dangerous. I want to become dangerous, maybe one day as dangerous as the professor here. But I invest time to be dangerous. Yeah. But my kids don't think I'm dangerous. My kids, I'm not a threat to my children. I'm not a threat to my wife. I'm not a threat to my colleagues, my fellow church members. But if somebody's trying to harm my children, I'm called to protect and preserve, protect my family, provide for my family. And, I pity the fool that, tries to come and mess with one of my kids when I'm there. Yeah. And what I love about jiu-jitsu is we are able to subdue threats without inflicting irreparable damage. Right. So I don't have to punch anybody. I can take somebody down, I can secure mount, and I can wait. I can wait until they chill out or till the cops come. And you can use technique to subdue larger, stronger opponents. And I want my kids to be able to do that. If God forbid somebody's trying to bully one of my kids, they can, and it gives you that level of confidence where they don't feel the need to engage. Right. They're not out looking for fights. I get beat up on the mats every day. So I'm not looking for another fight anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
I got a black belt waiting for me tomorrow, and I'm not looking to get into an extra rolling session tonight.
Right. What it's like to actually every jiu-jitsu instructor will tell people this. Once you train hard and regularly, and you're regularly rolling against resisting opponents, you're not doing like Krav Maga, like, I gouge you in the eyes and then I kick you in the groin but you can't really do that. So you don't actually know that works. Or karate, you punch here and then I block here and then I step here. It's all of that in theory is great, but you never get the chance to actually do it against somebody who's trying to stop you from doing it. And in grappling arts, not just jiu-jitsu, but judo, sambo, catch wrestling, any grappling art, you are every round being tested on what works and what doesn't work. It's the ultimate. It weeds out the nonsense so fast, and that's what separates grappling arts from other martial arts, because you can do them safely. Like you're saying, you can subdue. It's called the gentle art, or judo, the gentle way, because you don't have to go right to lethal force. Like when people say, well, I don't want to do martial arts, I'm just going to get my concealed carry license. And I always just think, well, I mean, I don't own a gun. I don't really have a desire to, but I get why some people would. But you have no choice. There's no scaling when it comes to a gun. You're going right to lethal. You're going right to killing someone as the primary intention, or at best maiming, wounding them. But with jiu-jitsu, you can do, have you seen the Matt Serra video with the drunk guy? Where Matt's just holding him down. Okay, buddy. Yeah. All right. Calm. And drunk guy is in a casino buffet or something. There's so many videos like that. Ryan Hall had the great one where the guy confronts him in the restaurant, and they're just example after example of jiu-jitsu people. I've seen a woman in Brazil was robbed and she held the attacker in a triangle until the police came. Like, you have that option. So you're an Old Testament professor, you know, like the goal in the Old Testament, God's vision is for shalom. It's for wholeness, integrity, peace. And shalom is not just the absence of violence, it's the presence of flourishing and wholeness and all of that. And so I look at learning martial arts as being able to help increase shalom. Like you're not just not afraid of getting in a fight, you have confidence to step in if somebody else is being harassed or bullied or whatever. And that increases shalom.
Yeah.
It's very paradoxical, you know, like learning to be dangerous so that you don't have to be dangerous.
Yeah. You know, I think about the Good Samaritan. You know, the Good Samaritan stumbles upon this guy after he had been robbed and all these things, and Jesus is telling. But sometimes being a Good Samaritan is preventing that guy from being robbed. You know, loving your neighbor is inserting yourself. And if you have those skills to do it, then it's a loving thing to do. If I see somebody else being bullied, if I see somebody else being abused or harmed, loving my neighbor is saying this isn't happening on my watch.
Yeah.
And being trained to be able to do that. And again, I'm not going out looking for fights. I'm not a confrontational person by nature. In fact, when I started training, a lot of before I was a believer, a lot of my frat boy friends, we'd go out and they would try to pick fights and they'd be like, what? Hey, Andrew, get him.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, whoa. I'm not doing that. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, cause you never know what's going to happen there. But, in the situations where somebody is trying to harm somebody I care about, I can step in, and I want my boys to be able to do that. You know, I want my daughter to be able to care for herself. And so it's just such a blessing to be able to do that. So I've never had an ethical issue with it. And, you know, I get people that aren't into MMA where, you know, you elbows, cuts, all this kind of stuff. I get that. You know, I don't have a problem with it. But I get that. But jiu-jitsu is different.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would encourage everyone,
Yeah.
everyone to get training, and don't wait another day. And you can sign up with this code. I'm just kidding.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
not selling anything, you know? Yeah, there's a reason that so many people are doing it.
Yeah. Well, I'm impressed by how many, or not impressed, I'm encouraged by how many Christians do jiu-jitsu, do grappling. There are a number of high level guys, you know, there are fighters and high level fighters who are starting to become more open about their faith, or at least are not as antagonistic to faith as they once were. Because, and I think a lot of it is because they're training in and around and among people who are high level people, you know, like Hobson Gracie. Hobson's, I believe he's a preacher in Brazil, or I've seen him go on mission trips and do preaching stuff. And this is like, you know, Henzo's brother. And then guys, you know, Tom DeBlass is always posting about Jesus and jiu-jitsu. And of course, Tom will be the first to say he's a mess. But he knows that he's a mess and he knows he needs Jesus. And so it's just, there's this journey that people are going on. And I think it's a large part of it is because they have met other Christians, godly, down to earth Christians who they train with, they roll with, they literally put their lives in their hands. Every time you choke somebody, you could potentially kill them if you don't let go. So there has to be a level of trust. And after a while, it tears down the divides that our culture has worked so hard to instill between people. And so you can have, you know, my students that are Muslim and I train together. Love those guys. One of my favorite training partners, militant, not militant, but like obnoxiously atheistic. And yet like, and he would say, you know, yeah, you're one of those Christians in it, but we get along great. We love each other. We train together. Yeah. It just creates this bond that at its best, jiu-jitsu does what the church should be doing. Like church should be a place where people come and get that fellowship. And I think because a lot of churches are not providing that fellowship, that authenticity, that people are going seeking for it elsewhere, and they're finding it in different places. Yeah. But I love
it
hearing
just shows that we are made for that kind of community, that diversity and, people from different walks of life.
Yes.
I mean, I think about the guys that I train with, I train with all different kinds of people, just as you were saying, different religious backgrounds and postures towards faith and different occupations and all these different things. We wouldn't normally find each other, but you're centered around this thing that kind of brings you together and keeps you coming back, right? Yep. And that is what we were made to do. Yes. That thing is Jesus. We were made to be a diverse community, every nation, tribe, tongue, all these things centered around Jesus. And something like Jiu-Jitsu images that in a different kind of way. And we love that thing. And we were made to love this thing, the real thing that the thing points to.
Yeah.
So
I could talk for hours about this because there's so much overlap. We have a video here, viewers. If you have not seen it, we have a video. What does Jesus have to do with jiu-jitsu? I'll link that in video description below. I want to talk. I have a Bible scholar here, though. We're not just two jiu-jitsu nerds. We're also Bible nerds. Now, the roles are flipped when it comes to biblical studies, because in this case, Andrew is the black belt by far. What's your background? Like, how did you get into Old Testament studies in particular, going from a guy who trains and comes to faith in college? You said a pastor, kind of discipled you, and then you thought about seminary. Just connect those dots to where you are now with working. You're working, or have you already finished the commentary on Hosea?
It's in progress.
Okay.
So I have a first draft done, and it's going to be a little while before it comes out. But,
okay, so get us from driving to a competition and realizing you need to know the Lord to publishing a commentary on Hosea. That's not a typical path. So
that's not, no. The Lord has the way of knocking you off your horse and telling you to go somewhere else, doesn't he? So when I became a Christian, I was living in a fraternity house and didn't know anything. I knew the Bible stories that one hears growing up, David, go slay your Goliaths and all these things. And so much of my, post kind of conversion experience was just reading the Bible a ton. And the more I read, I'm like, man, this is like so crazy, all these stories and all these things. And there's so much here. And I ate it up, though. I wanted to study as much as I could. So I wasn't a reader before then, but I went to the Christian bookstore and got books. I learned that there, are different kinds of books at a Christian bookstore.
No,
I remember I got a book called Breaking the Enemy's Grip, and it advised me to write down on little sheets of paper every sin that I could consciously remember, and then to burn it in the fire as I prayed this particular prayer over it. And I was like, that seems a little complicated, but as I got plugged into this church, I realized, my pastor was discipling me, and he shouldn't, but he gave me opportunities to teach and to preach, to corporate worship. I wasn't ready for that, but by God's grace, the Lord helped me, and the church was built up. I got positive feedback saying that it was helpful. And I said, man, I want to do this for the rest of my life, And so I went to seminary, not really knowing what seminary was. I thought, pastor or missionary, those are the two options that are available to Christians.
What was your undergrad? Real quick, what was your undergrad degree?
So I was undeclared for the first 3 years, and they gave me an ultimatum, and you have to pick a major. We need you to leave. So I latched on to communication.
I was just going to say, did you choose communications?
I did. Yeah, I was a PR major. So
that's great. I love that. All right, so you got to seminary. Where did you do seminary?
I went to Southern Seminary in Louisville.
Okay.
And so that was, got plugged in at Southern, just had some really good mentors there. Jonathan Pennington, Jarvis Williams, these people were just hugely influential. And I started to see the Bible not as these disjointed things, but as one story that all centers around Jesus, that, the road to Emmaus is legit. Jesus can look back at the Old Testament and say, these things are about me.
Right.
And, he says that, the guys walking with him were slow to believe. I said, I don't want to be slow to believe everything that the prophet said. So I started digging into the Old Testament and realizing how deep of a well it is. But seeing that it does center on Jesus. And so my interest, I kind of was I was in the local church. I did a pastoral internship, and just kind of over the course of hanging with pastors, I realized that wasn't what the Lord was calling me to do vocationally. So kind of while that was kind of going down, my desire for academic ministry was increasing, just seeing my professors and the way that they served the church and the different things that they were doing. And so it was curiosity that really got me into Old Testament studies. When I finished my MDiv, I was like, man, I still don't understand the Old Testament. So I gotta pursue further studies in it. So I linked up with an amazing supervisor, Dwayne Garrett, just an expert on everything and just so generous with his time and just really invested in me in many different ways. And so I was very interested in the prophetic literature. Just what are the prophets doing? They're speaking these oracles of judgment and, just watching how some of the prophets are quoted in the New Testament. I'm just like, how does that work? And so it was very interesting. So my dissertation work was on Amos. I was looking at how the book of Amos shapes the identity of its audience. What does it mean to be the people of God? And the book of Amos, I think, makes a case for what it looks like to be the people of God, and looking at the various rhetorical strategies that he was employing. And so interested in the prophets from there, the minor prophets. And then an opportunity opened up to do work in Hosea. So that's kind of where my current research interests are. And I just look back and, there's a Puritan who said that God's providence is much like a Hebrew word. It can only be read backwards. And so I look back, and I see God's providence, at every stage. It's like, you remember that Rascal Flatts song, God Bless the Broken Road that led me straight to you?
I'm ashamed to say I do. Yes. Not being a country guy, I actually do know that one.
There's no shame. It's a good song. And I regularly sing it to my open Word document manuscript. I say, God bless the broken road that led me straight to you.
Yeah. So you did your PhD under Dwayne Garrett. That's correct?
Yeah.
So when was that? What years?
That would have been probably in 2012.
Okay. He was when I was at Gordon Conwell, he was there. And so there was two kind of the route for studying Hebrew. You either study Hebrew with Pratico or with Garrett. I just had, because of schedule, I had to take it with Pratico, but my guy down the hall took it with Garrett. And so we would kind of swap notes. And so I was bummed that I never got to have him as a professor, but I would see him all the time. And he was part of that, Jeff Niehaus, Doug Stewart, Dwayne Garrett, like that whole archaeological study Bible crew that put this thing together. Which this is my favorite study Bible to this day. And I'm on a one-man crusade. Maybe you can help me to get Zondervan to republish it. I've been banging that drum for a long time because it's so good. And Garrett was the main editor of this. And other guys, Walt Kaiser and other Old Testament, Gordon Hugenberger, like people that really, for me, they opened my eyes during my MDiv to exactly what you're talking about. That Emmaus Road, the Old Testament is way deeper than I thought, and it's way more Christian than I thought. And too few Christians are studying it. Everybody's going to Greek and everybody's going to New Testament, and God bless them, but we need Old Testament people. And that kind of pulled me in that direction. There's a lot of things I want to ask people because I don't have a PhD. I stopped at MDiv. So I always tell people I'm a popularizer. I'm like the Bill Nye the Science Guy for Bible nerds. Like I have a foot in that world, but I'm not the published, actual guy. When you went for your PhD, how do you choose what you want to, because you have to spend years of your life studying this one thing. How did you whittle it down How did you end up at Amos of all of the things you could have studied?
Yeah, so it was kind of funny. I went to my supervisor when I first started, and I said, Dr. Garrett, I don't know what I'm going to write on. I knew I wanted to do something in the minor prophets just because I didn't know anything about them. So I knew I wanted to do something there. It sounded cool. And so I went to Dr. Garrett and I said, hey, what do you want me to write on? Like, give me a topic. I'll advance your research. I'll do whatever you want. And in his sage wisdom, he said, well, just go where your research takes you. And I said, well, that's profoundly unhelpful. My research has brought me right back here to you because I don't know, what am I doing? So I think a lot of doctoral students kind of have this panic moment of what am I supposed to write on? Some come like locked in. I know I want to look at this thing. And, but for some, it is a kind of an existential crisis. And I was feeling a little bit of that. You're supposed to, there's a lot of pressure. You're supposed to produce something new and all this stuff. And so I was just hoping my supervisor would hand me something, but he wouldn't. And he would give me some things to read, some things to think about. And so I was just out there. And so what I did was I was kind of reading outside my field. And I was just reading as much as I could. And this is something I encourage my own students to do. If you're wanting to look at, I kind of narrowed it down to the 8th century prophets. Those were just the ones that piqued my interest as I was reading them. So Hosea, Amos, Micah. And so I was reading around and I saw methodologies applied to different texts. And in particular, they published this handbook on social identity in the New Testament. And it's this big fat TNT Clark thing. And as I read through some of the chapters there, I said, oh, they're like asking really good questions. What does it mean to be the people of God? How is Paul shaping the people of God? You look at the pastoral epistles. How is he telling Timothy to talk about the people of God and to lead the people of God into what it means to be the people of God? And I thought that's such a fascinating question. Has anybody asked that about the book of Amos? How does the book of Amos shape the people of God, shape their identity, not as individuals, but their social identity as the people of God? And as I looked around, I used something called social identity theory that just looks at how groups are formed, group formation and in-group and out-group dynamics and all these things that we do intuitively, that there's research that has explored these things. And I realized that nobody had done that with the book of Amos. So I applied a methodology that was being applied widely in New Testament studies that had only been applied in Old Testament studies to a couple of places. There was a study on Zechariah, and then there was a book on Ruth. And those were really the only things that I found that had to do with this kind of methodology. So I applied that methodology to the book of Amos, and that was my original contribution. And the methodology got refined a little bit, because you have to work with the data that you have. So I was looking at the book of Amos. It kind of tweaked some things and put things together in a different way. But that was a fun project.
So how far into your from when you started your PhD, like how far into the process was that? Were you doing any like undergrad teaching or anything at the time, or because there's three different models. There's like the European model, which is you just go and start your dissertation from day one. Then there's the North American model, which is like you do a couple of years of teaching and learning how to be a teacher, and then there's like the Mid-Atlantic. So like where in that's my understanding from 20 years ago when I was looking at PhDs. So where in that did you go? Like, what was your route?
Yeah, so it was a North American model where we had coursework where we were exploring different things.
Okay.
So I took classes on all kinds of things. And then we had comprehensive exams, and those are really helpful to kind of develop lecture notes and just get my arms around the field. Very stressful, but was very helpful for just kind of thinking about the field and state of Old Testament studies. Okay. So it wasn't really until, and actually I originally had wanted to write about something else. and I was hanging on to that. I wanted to have a pretty strong like archaeological focus to my thing, but I realized that wouldn't work out with where I was with my program and kind of the supervisors and readers that were kind of in my network. So I hung on to that for probably too long. And it wasn't really until after my comprehensive exams that I then started exploring dissertation topics that were, plausible for me. Yeah. So that I don't recommend that. Once you get to that point, you want to hit the ground running with your writing. Right. But yeah, so I kind of took a long route there. But that allowed me to dive deep into my subject matter, kind of have fresh eyes as I was looking at these things with the, full scope of everything that I'd seen from my comps and my coursework and all of that kind of in my mind already.
Man, some people, so viewers, Disciple Dojo viewers are probably split down the middle at this point, and half of them are probably like, wait, I want to ask more about, the PhD. And the other half are probably like, all right, I checked out after jiu-jitsu. But that's the beauty of, I think, there are levels to the game. Like, just like in jiu-jitsu, when you're a white belt and a blue belt shows you something, you're just like, boom, your mind is blown. And then when you're a brown belt, you look back and you're like, that's the most basic thing ever. But it's legitimately mind blowing for the white belt. And so when it comes to biblical studies, for a lot of church people, they think, somebody's a scholar. That just means they've read a lot more, or maybe they know a little bit more. And so that's why I'm always so probably too reactionary when people refer to me. They said, oh, this is JM, he's a scholar. And I'm like, no, because it's like somebody calling you a black belt when you're a purple belt. You're just like, no, I haven't earned that yet. So when I get to talk to scholars here on the channel, to me, it's like the purple belt sitting in on a black belt seminar and catching the details and asking all the nerdy questions that the white and blue belts are like, wait, what? I don't even. So we don't want to go too specialized. What we're going to do is, in this jiu-jitsu themed episode, is we've got Andrew's here, a scholar, Old Testament, minor prophets, working on Hosea. That's where you've been. How many years before have you been camped in Hosea for your commentary?
And it's been about 4 years that I've been plugging away.
Okay. So years of focus in Hosea. So what we want to do, and I sent him some questions beforehand, is start with some white belt level questions and then work up to black belt level questions. And not super comprehensive. You can go as long or as short as you want. I don't know when your hard out is. So you just answer as long-winded or as terse as you want to be is fine with us. I want to start out with some white belt Hosea questions. So the first question is, somebody, maybe they don't even know Hosea is in the Bible. What is the book? Like at the most basic level, you've got 14 chapters and it's not a story. Like the story part seems to end in chapter 3. Or what most people would consider. So how do you wrap your mind around the book of Hosea for brand new Bible readers? What is it?
So Hosea is the self-revelation of the triune God. That's true of every book of the Bible. It is God speaking. You hear the voice of God. In Hosea 1:1, it identifies God as the speaker. It is the word of Yahweh, which came to Hosea. And so Hosea receives the self-revelation of the triune God within the 66 canon books of our Christian canon. And so Hosea is kind of a whirlwind of a book. It's situated in the 8th century. So Hosea is kind of contemporary with Amos and Isaiah and Micah. He's a prophet to the northern kingdom, like Amos. But unlike Amos, Hosea appears to be from the northern kingdom. Amos is a southern prophet who, kind of goes on vacay to the north for a little bit of time.
Right.
But Hosea is from the northern kingdom, and the book begins with this focus on the metaphor, the kind of a sign act where Hosea we can talk about this in a little bit, but
yep, we'll get there. We'll get there.
He enters into a most unusual family, where there is marriage, I argue adoption and children, and all of this in chapters 1 to 3 is to picture the alienation of Israel from their covenant partner, Yahweh. And so from all these different angles, we see that Israel has broken the covenant. And the language that is used is so graphic. There's language of whoring away from Yahweh. The land whores away from Yahweh. And so there's kind of this metaphor of household that is introduced. And we have these cycles of the announcement of sin, the announcement of covenant curses, divine judgment, and then God looks beyond the judgment and he announces salvation beyond judgment. He would redeem his people. And so many of these themes are kind of woven throughout the Old Testament, but I love the way that Hosea brings them together. There's messianic themes, there's resurrection themes, there's new Exodus themes, all of these things that we see kind of these 3 cycles in Hosea 1 to 3. So that's kind of the first major division, Hosea 1 to 3. The rest of the book is pretty widely debated on exactly how it fits together. Hosea 4 to 14. I typically divide Hosea 4 to 11. I kind of view that as kind of a section that focuses on kind of the death and resurrection of Israel, kind of part 1. So Hosea announces Israel's covenant faithlessness in various ways. And so they're sinning through idolatry. They're sinning through idolatry in its religious form. They're worshiping other gods. A big problem in Hosea, though, is not the worship of other gods, but the worship of a false Yahweh. So I think that's pretty significant. This worship of a false Yahweh,
like a syncretism. Combining Yahweh with something else or creating their own Yahweh.
So it's interesting because they're doing Yahweh type things. They're invoking Yahweh's name in their vows, for instance. They in 8:2, Yahweh says, "To me they cry, my God, we Israel know you." So they think that they are in right relationship with God. And I think one of the central ways that this manifests itself is in the golden calf. Hosea talks about these golden calves. Now, we know the golden calf all the way back from the book of Exodus, where Aaron, while Moses was, tarrying too long on the mountain, they formed this golden calf. And I think back then in Exodus, I don't think that they're trying to interject a brand new deity that nobody has ever heard of before. Right. So I think that they are trying to bring Yahweh into their midst. They're trying to control Yahweh. And so the same thing happens with the division of the kingdom in 1 Kings 12, where Jeroboam breaks away from the southern kingdom. That happens because Solomon's son's Rehoboam, there's a technical scholarly word for this. He's a moron. So he makes bad life choices.
Yes.
And then the kingdom is divided.
Yes.
And so Jeroboam, he implements 2 golden calves in the northern kingdom at Dan and Bethel. And later there's another king named Jeroboam, and he's actually named in Hosea 1:1, Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. And so that's Jeroboam number 2. And he does calf stuff too. He's kind of perpetuating this calf cult. And I think that is one of the ways that they envision this false Yahweh. They think they're worshiping Yahweh through this golden calf, right? Why would they need to do that? Well, normally you would center your worship around the Ark of the Covenant, right? But where's the Ark of the Covenant? Oh, it's in Judah, right? So Jeroboam doesn't want people going down south. So Jeroboam 1, he sets up golden calf in Dan, golden calf in Bethel. There is Yahweh's presence near you. no matter where you live in the Northern Kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so there, he does other things where he, jacks with the religious calendar. He, brings in non-Levitical priests, all this stuff. So he's basically trying to take Yahweh religion and he's trying to cater it to his own needs. And I think that is something that the book of Hosea warns the people of the day and Christians today about forming a kind of religion that looks so orthodox in so many different ways. You can say the right things at church.
Right.
You can post the right things on Facebook, but it turns out you're not worshiping the Yahweh that has spoken all things into existence and is forming a people for himself. But it's a Yahweh that kind of is in your control. It's a false Yahweh. And so we're not surprised when you read throughout the book of Hosea that injustice is present, because when you worship a false Yahweh, nobody should be surprised when that false Yahweh blesses, whatever the people in power want to do. And so, so he talks a lot about injustice and all of these things. He talks about violence that basically floods the land in Hosea 4:3, for instance. So he's dealing with idolatries in all of its different forms. There's kind of the worship of a false Yahweh. There's other gods. There's a lot of political idolatry where they're trying to set up their own kings. And if they don't like those kings, they, have them knocked off, and then they set up another king in his place. So there's kind of a cycle of kings towards the end of the Northern Kingdom. But then through all this, there's kind of these announcements of judgment, different metaphors that are being used kind of throughout. So
this is all directed to the tribes, not Judah. Like the Northern Kingdom.
That's right. This is northern Israel, although Judah is mentioned several places throughout the book, right? And I think that's intentional. I think as one who is hearing from Yahweh, he knows, he's aware of the Davidic covenant, that God has promised that there's always going to be a man to sit on the throne from the line of David, that the new David who would come would be associated with Judah. He knows the royal promises that are associated with the Southern Kingdom and in Jerusalem. And so he's tapping into some of those things. And I don't think that should surprise us at all.
Right.
So at various points, he differentiates Judah. He'll point out Israel is sinful, and yet there's still hope for Judah. At other points, he says Israel and Judah are equally sinful before God and equally in need of redemption. And so all these things kind of get worked out. But there's some great messianic promises that are kind of thrown in there as well.
Yes, which we're going to get to when we get a little bit higher up the belt ladder. But that's a good overview for white belt level on what's going on at the time. You said his contemporaries, Isaiah, Micah, Amos, any other?
So those are the ones that we can date.
Okay.
Nahum is a little bit later. So that's a half century more than that removed from Hosea, but it's during this kind of Assyrian period. So as you read the book of Hosea, you see Assyria pop up several times, and it's because Assyria was the superpower of the day. So in the 8th century, Assyria was kind of the big bad guy, and that's before Babylon came in and kind of took over.
I know that there's questions about some of the dating of the prophets, and it depends on different dating schemes and different things like that. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people, is trying to kind of keep who's talking about what, and especially ones like Joel and others where there's a range. It could be at any point. But with Hosea, we can kind of get a good idea of where it is. He's mostly talking to when he as our friend Jason Staples would say, we got to be careful when you say Israel to not equate that with the Jews. When he was on, we talked a lot about that. And so I try to keep that in mind which Israel is being talked about. Which, does it mean all of the sons of Israel, or does it mean the northern kingdom of Israel, the dispersed lost tribes of Israel, all that kind of stuff? But primarily you're saying Hosea, northern kingdom. He knows Judah is existing. He knows the promises to Judah, but his focus is the northern kingdom, which the capital will be in Samaria, and the idolatry centers, Bethel, which he calls Beth Aven, right? Beth Aven or Beth Avan?
Yeah, Beth Aven, yeah.
Beth Aven.
Which means house of iniquity.
Yeah.
Right. So you think the Bethel means house of God. And he said, that's not the house of God. That's the house of iniquity, because the Yahweh stuff that's happening at Bethel is not honoring to the one true God.
It's a nickname of the city. Like, it's not the actual city's name. It's like a prophetic slur against the city.
Yeah. Interestingly, he blends religion. He shows how religion and politics so often works together. So at various places, for instance, he talks about the religion that's going on in the Northern Kingdom, and he refers to it kind of in different ways. For instance, he talks about, I think it's in chapter 8. He references in 8:5, for instance, he references the calf of Samaria. He says in 8:5, he has rejected your calf, Samaria. Wait a second. There's not a golden calf in Samaria. Why does he associate the calf with Samaria? And he does this at various places. I think he's saying, and this is the same thing that Amos says. There's this famous scene in Amos 7 where Amos goes to Bethel. That is where Hosea is chastising. Talking about, and he goes to Bethel, this is Amos, and he proclaims the word of Yahweh. And the priest Amaziah at Bethel says, get that nonsense out of here. That word does not belong here. This is the temple of the king. And so he associates the religion at Bethel with the king and kingly religion. And so he says, the word of Yahweh is not welcomed here because this is political religion that we do here. And I think Hosea is saying the same thing. He's saying, the golden calves may physically be at Dan and Bethel, but really they're centered in Samaria.
Yeah.
That's really where their power is drawn from. It's not from on high. It's not the God of heaven and earth that you meet there. It's Jeroboam's God. It's a political deity. That is under the thumb of Jeroboam. And so this calf of Samaria, I think, kind of tips us off on that kind of thing.
Viewers, I can already maybe see the wheels spinning, because we just had Caleb Campbell on this month and talked about Christian nationalism and that whole concept of merging of the political realm with the religious and how fervently people can buy into it. Because it's tangible. It's not as, and they don't have to worry about things like social justice. And okay, let's move those. Let's get into a blue belt questions then. Blue belt, you start to ask a little more questions at blue belt than you did at white. Well, first, just as a nerdy question, I looked at my Hebrew Bible and sometimes the verse numbers don't line up. Do we have any idea why, or is that a Septuagint thing, or is that a Hebrew manuscript variant thing? Or is it just like Psalms and the superscriptions just not being numbered in English for some reason? Like, what's going on with that? Does that make a difference at all?
It's maddening is what it is. So yeah, whenever there's deviation between the English text and the Hebrew text, whenever you're referencing a book, you have to say, okay, which one are they citing, particularly if they don't have the other one kind of listed. But yeah, if you look in your English Bible and you're reading your English Bible and you get to, for instance, Hosea 1:10, and if you're reading your English Bible alongside your Hebrew Bible, you'll notice English 1:10 isn't Hebrew 1:10, but is actually the beginning of the second chapter in Hebrew. So you notice kind of a verse difference there. So 1:10 in English is 2:1 in Hebrew, and throughout the rest of chapter 2, they're kind of staggered like that. So Hosea 2 in Hebrew has 25 verses, where there's 23 verses in English, and so it's just a little bit different. There's the same total number of verses for the book, but it's just where some of the lines are kind of drawn. So they sync back up at 3:1 and they basically are the same from 3:1 all the way to the end of chapter 11, where there's a little bit of a difference where the English 11:12 is 12:1 in Hebrew. And so all of this, there's a little bit of difference there. There's something in 14 as well. There's a little bit of a difference there. It doesn't matter for the interpretation. You know, it's not always clear why the versification is different. With the example with 110, it makes a little bit more sense because in English 110, you have a shift in tone. So in the previous sections, 1, 2 to 9, you have these children that are signifying judgment, and in 110 it shifts to a note of hope. So that seems like a really logical break. So there may have been some interpretive things kind of that were introduced there as far as why the tradition is different. But the English follows the Septuagint, the Vulgate. They all kind of were aligned there. So it may have just been reading different reading traditions that weren't playing.
Well, it underscores the important point for people getting into Bible study is realizing that chapters and verses aren't inspired. That they are additions by various editors over centuries to keep people on the same page. And there's no conspiracy to it in most cases.
Right.
And nothing's being hidden or left out. So you mentioned earlier, let's do another blue belt question. This is the big question that a lot of people have when they first read Hosea. Once they've read it, they go, wait a minute, Hosea's a prophet. God's a God of holiness. Did he really command one of his prophets to marry a prostitute, a zonah, whether you translate it a prostitute, harlot, whore, whatever word? Did he really do that? Or is this just a metaphor? Or when I was at Gordon Conwell, I remember Niehaus and Stewart would have a little friendly back and forth because I was taking both of them at the same semester. And Doug Stewart had made a big emphasis in intermediate Hebrew that when you have the phrase a blank of blanks, and it's plural. So in Hosea case, woman of prostitutions, that means it's not talking literal, but it's talking about it's a metaphor. So it just means an idolatrous woman. So she was spiritually idolatrous. Niehaus said, literally verbatim, he said, "Is that what Dougie Boy's teaching you guys?" in the next class. And he said that he's like, no, she was literally a prostitute. So they had like a funny, and I just loved having professors that would kind of jab at each other and were friends and colleagues. Where do you land on that? I never had Professor Garrett. I would have loved to have picked his brain on it. But Gomer, was she actual prostitute? Was she just unfaithful, promiscuous? Was she a temple prostitute, like a technical Kedoshim type thing? Or was it just all metaphor and she was just a regular Israelite idolater? Where do you land, Dr. King?
Well, I would recommend anybody who wants to do a deep dive in Dwayne Garrett's commentary and the New American Commentary series, which I'm an editor. I'm a general editor for the Christian Standard Commentary, and he's revising his Hosea Joel volume for that, which should be excellent.
Oh, fantastic.
So I would commend that to you, his NAC volume until the new one comes out, and he has a really good survey of all the different views. But taking a step back, asking, all right, what does God commission Hosea to do? Okay, so in most English translations, when you read Hosea 1:2, so for instance, the NIV, I've got the NIV pulled up here. The NIV and Hosea 1:2 says, "Go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her." Okay. So go marry a promiscuous woman and have children with her. So I take issue with that translation, not just on the promiscuous woman section, but with the second part. So what does God commission Hosea to do? The phrase that's used is to take a wife. All right, that is legal language for marriage in the Old Testament, to take a wife. So that means just get married. But literally the text says, take a wife of Zenunim whoredom, I'll just use whoredom, and children of whoredom. there's one verb, there's two objects. Take a wife and children. So what the NIV does and many other translations is they insert the word have in there. So marry a woman and have children with her. Okay, so that makes sense because the rest of chapter 1 is about children that I believe are all born to Hosea and Gomer. And they receive these names. And that's kind of the focus, right? But the language of taking a child is very standard language in the ancient world for adoption. So I think you look, for instance, at Esther 2:7, where Mordecai takes Esther and he as signifying his adoption of her. So, and then you also see similar language in Ruth 4, for instance. So what does God commission Hosea to do? I believe he says to marry a woman with a public reputation for immorality. And evidence of her public reputation for immorality is that she has children already from these previous relationships. And so he marries this woman and adopts her children. And then the rest of chapter 1 is about the children that are born to them. So what's the significance of that? From the very beginning, it is about household. And not just a biological household, not just a thing about biological children, but it is a mixed household. So that's all signaling from different angles what I think he's going to articulate about the people of God in the future.
Well, let me pause real quick. This is important for viewers if you can't, let's say you can't read Hebrew, is comparing translations and even comparing versions of the same translation. Because what I'm looking at, my NIV Archaeological Study Bible, edited by Dwayne Garrett and Gordon Conwell faculty, uses the 1984 NIV text. And the 1984 NIV text doesn't say apparently the 2011 text. The 84 text says exactly what you just said. When the Lord began to speak through Hosea, the Lord said to him, go take to yourself an adulterous, they translate adulterous wife, and children of unfaithfulness. It doesn't have the two verb, and it doesn't introduce have children of whatever. That is easily glossed over. I don't even know if I've noticed that before because I don't have the new NIV in front of me that they would have made that change. But there's a case where, which you would say, no, the 84 NIV had it closer.
Yeah, and I mean the King James, it retains the two objects like that. Go take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, and some other translations like the NASB, for instance, retains kind of the two things. Although it has a very awkward translation, take to yourself a wife inclined to infidelity. Oh, what does that even mean?
That's interesting. Yeah. So and that's NASB.
That's the NASB. Yeah.
So this is a great reminder for viewers. You have no excuse to not compare translations in the age of YouVersion, where literally on your phone you can have every English translation that's out there, and doing this will alert you to things like what Andrew's talking about, where you go, wait a minute, why does this verse say this? Why does this version say this? That's so important. That's blue belt level stuff. Is you don't have the languages yet. No worries. Compare translations and ask the questions when you see differences among them.
Yeah, and just a plug for those who are able and have an opportunity to explore the biblical languages. The biblical languages are not a silver bullet. It's not going to make you. It's not going to get you closer to God. Your walk with Jesus isn't going to be transformed because you can, parse a Hebrew verb or something like that. But one of the values I find for my Hebrew students is that they just read slower. So sometimes even when you're comparing translations, you're skipping over things. You're like, they're basically saying the same thing. But when you're looking at it word by word, asking, how do these things fit together? So plug for learning the languages or just reading slowly, just word by word and asking why.
That is black belt level tip right there for sure. And that applies to jiu-jitsu. I don't know how many times I've told jiu-jitsu students, do the move slowly. Every single step I taught you, there's a reason for it. And they want to rush right to the finish. That applies perfectly to biblical studies. Is read the text slowly and ask those questions. I love that. Well, let's move on to purple belt because,
let me just give.
Oh yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Finish up. Yeah.
So, wife of whoredom. What is that? So some people were so scandalized by the idea of Hosea, God commanding Hosea to marry a woman of ill repute of any kind, that, I mean, some just entirely removed the whole thing. So the Targum, for instance, removes any type of marriage and it turns it all into prophesying against an idolatrous city. So it just removes all of the marriage stuff. So there's Hosea doesn't get married. He prophesies against a city. But Christian interpreters like Calvin were so scandalized that they said this is all a vision. So there's not an actual marriage. It's a vision. Some people who see an issue with this, they say that this is Hosea later reflecting on his marriage. He gets married and, his wife runs off and, has a series of affairs. And he says, that's kind of like Israel. And so it's kind of like hindsight, all these things. And yes, Doug Stewart does this thing with idolatry. My issue with that is, there's a lot of idolaters around. And so is the commission just go get married to anyone, And so I think God is commissioning Hosea to go marry a particular woman. Right. Like I think that when he says go marry a woman of whoredom and adopt children of whoredom, he says, yeah, I know her. I've seen her around, she's not just some random person. She's not just like, somebody he passes on the street. He goes and he finds this particular person. And when he marries this woman and he adopts her children, it is a public thing. And when he has subsequent children with her, it is a public thing. And as with other prophetic sign acts, goodness gracious, Isaiah, he walks around naked for a little while, and that's a very public sign act, in Isaiah 20.
And by a little while, you mean 3 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. But he's visualizing the coming exile, right, to Egypt and to Cush. And so it's a public sign act that is to provoke a certain thing. Right. So if it's a later reflection, I don't think that works. And I don't think it's just a generic thing. The phrase is unusual, though, because it's not the usual word for prostitute. Right. Zonah is the word typical for prostitute, but this is not that. It is a pluralized form. It's an abstract form. It's zenunim. Right. So that's an odd way to speak. And the fact that the children are characterized by the same thing. It's a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms that Hosea is to take. And so I think this is a woman who is characterized by public immorality, has children as a result, who by virtue of their association with their mother are kind of swept up. Children often bear the scars of their parents. And I think that these children are being identified that way. And any subsequent children that are associated with Gomer are children of whoredom by extension. And so I think that's kind of what the initial sign act is doing. And all of that is setting up this shocking thing that it's not ultimately about a marriage with weird family dynamics, a broken household. That is a picture of something more significant. Israel has been faithless to their covenant partner, Yahweh.
It's so powerful, too, because you have a prophet then doing what God does, which is like getting his hands dirty, like getting down into the nitty gritty of a sinfully broken world, not being afraid to enter into that, which is exactly what God does throughout Scripture, not afraid to get down in. And the tendency like that we have to want to sanitize things because of God's reputation, like he's not big enough to handle, or he didn't know that it would be scandalous. And yeah, I did. That's, again, could do a whole episode on each one of these questions.